Yeah, I have some superpowers that we have that I
Oh,
think, help us that, part of it is number one, releasing the story about sales being icky.
this is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 235, The Introvert's Super Selling Powers, an interview with Beth Belo.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. Today, our guest is Beth Belo. She's the author of the book Introvert Entrepreneur. She's a coach, a speaker, and she is the host of the Introvert Entrepreneur podcast. Beth's quite the introvert booster. She believes they can be great at sales and extraordinary entrepreneurs, and they can do this by leveraging their natural gifts of listening, preparation, making people feel safe, and embracing the attitude that sales is not icky, it's really about education. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Beth. Are you ready to babble?
I am ready to babble. I'm good at babbling. That's Babble Below. That's me.
Belo. Beth, you're the author of the book, The Introvert Entrepreneur. Amplify your strengths and create success on your own terms. How is it that introverts can be entrepreneurs?
Well, in order to answer that, we really have to think about what is the actual definition of introvert. Because there are a lot of misperceptions that have, admittedly getting clearer over the years, but I'm always surprised to find new people that don't quite understand exactly what an introvert is. So in order to understand how introverts can be entrepreneurs, we have to know that introversion does not equal shy. It does not necessarily equal quiet either. It means that we gain our energy through solitude and lower stimulation environments, and we drain energy when we're in social interaction. So when you think about it in terms of energy drain, it's not about a social skills. It's not about shyness. It's saying when we're in those social situations, and of course, being an entrepreneur puts us in many social situations, whether it's networking or sales, putting ourselves out there on social media, we can do all of that. The important thing is to recognize that in order to do it, we have to be able to have time to ourselves. We have to make sure that we are recharging our batteries through solitude, through, kind of hitting the mute button on life, if you will, and stepping away and being able to, get our inner resources back so that we can step out and interact with people, be engaging, be the salesperson, be the networker, and put ourselves out there. So that's, part of being an introvert and an entrepreneur is to understand that you're both. And how do you honor that introvert part of you that needs the downtime in order to be up?
My background's engineering. I worked with a lot of engineers through the years, and many of these people were introverts. It was a higher proportion of them. I don't know what the number would be,
Yeah, not
statistically
surprised.
speaking, but it's a ton of them. People who are very, very comfortable sitting behind a screen, and
Yes.
building stuff and creating stuff and think things like that. But I do remember this one time I was taking a class from a lady, and she says, it may seem like I'm quite the extrovert. She goes, but I'm actually an introvert, and this takes a huge amount of energy for me to do this. And she goes,
Yes.
I will be totally exhausted. Where more
Yep.
extroverty people like me actually get charged up by being around people and helping
That's
people
right.
and being in conversation. That's kind of why I podcast.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting is that introverts can do that too, right? Like I podcast and I enjoy the conversations. It's simply, yes, sometimes it depends. I can be energized by it, but I can be energized in the moment and then it has taken everything out of me. I've given everything and then I have to retreat. Like you were talking about, before we got on here, you said like, this is a day of doing podcast interviews. I've learned, I could do maybe 2 max in one day. And even that's stretching it before I feel like I can't be present for somebody anymore. I have to step away. And that's the part that like I can be really there in the conversation, but then I have to step back. Otherwise, I will hit a wall, and you don't want to have anything to do with that.
So being an introvert, this is an interesting thing that you brought up that I really wasn't cognizant of. The idea that it's not about being shy, it's not about being quiet.
Right, right. And we can appear that way, right? Because often in social situations, we're hanging back, we're listening more than we're talking. On the outside, people can have this perception that we are even aloof, if you want to start going towards negative stereotyping, or snobby is another, adjective that I've heard introverts say that people will accuse them of being. But really, we're just simply taking things in. We're observers and listeners. And when we decide to chime in, it's because we have sort of taken the pulse of the situation. We're not going to talk unless we've got something to say. And so that can lead to people being like, well, what's wrong with you? You're not engaging, you're not talking. It's like, well, I am. I'm listening and I'm observing, and I might be formulating a response in my head. And I'll say it when I'm ready, but I'm not going to think out loud like your typical extrovert.
Which brings us to a good point, actually, because this is a sales podcast.
Yes.
And we think of sellers as being gregarious, outgoing, backslappers, life of the party kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't necessarily the only path to be in sales. And in fact, I remember I had one guest on who actually said that that's actually negative in
Right.
being successful in sales, and that if you're actually more introvertish.
Introvertish. I haven't heard that one.
If that's a word, Dan Pink's believes that this idea of the ambivert is the very.
Yes.
Have you read Dan Pink's book?
I was just going to quote Dan Pink.
So why don't you tell the audience what he says?
Well, he talks about, he offers a study, and it was a large one of European and American customers. And what they found was that the most destructive behavior of salespeople was not being ill-informed, right? It wasn't that they didn't know their product or anything like that. It was actually an excess, this is how he put it, an excess of assertiveness and zeal that led to contacting customers too frequently.
An excess.
In excess, yeah. He says extroverts, in other words, often stumble over themselves. They can talk too much or listen too little, which dulls their understanding of other people's perspectives. And so they don't, and of course this is not all extroverts. Just like anything I say about introverts is not about all introverts. This is, one study and what they found. And I'm guessing, some introverts and extroverts, as they're listening to this, might say, oh yeah, that's kind of me. I can overdo my enthusiasm and not realize that can drive somebody away, because they're not listening enough. So there were other studies that said, like, when they identified people as introverts, ambiverts, or extroverts, they tracked their sales over a period of time. The extroverts actually performed the worst of the group. The introverts performed in the middle, the ambiverts performed best. And we should clarify what ambivert means, right? An ambivert means that somebody who can sort of straddles both worlds of introvert and extrovert. So they can gain energy through solitude, they gain energy through human interaction. Ideally, we're all sort of moving towards that ambivert energy while honoring whatever our core is. So I have, cultivated some of my extrovert skills so that I can do things like have this podcast conversation or go out and have a sales conversation. But my default is still introvert. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think actually my default is really ambivert.
Yeah.
I think I've just been around introverts for decades here, for so long. I can't help but have it rub off.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of being like a whole integrated, balanced human being. I don't ever want to meet the person that's 100% one or the other. We all have elements of each in us, and there's just like the nature nurture, debate. There's part of it that is nature and part of it that's nurture. And a lot
Yep.
of that has to do with who you're hanging around with, what family dynamic was that you were raised in, um, what your peers are doing. So there's absolutely a nurture aspect to all of this.
Before the Sales Babble, I had a blog called The Tao Te Ching of Sales, and it
Hmm.
was all about finding balance when selling. Not,
Oh,
not
yes.
not too much of this, not too much
Yep.
of that, not too much listening, not too much talking, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and that's something that, you practice and my guess is that the closer you are to talking to your ideal client or customer, the more naturally that kind of balance will come.
Oh, I totally agree. What more can you say about that?
Well, I think when we're with someone that is not resonating with us, we can become, and this is the first time I've had this thought, so bear with me because I'm thinking out loud, which is not my default. Um, but when we're with someone that's not resonating, I don't know about you, but I can get a little nervous, and so I can talk too much. I can forget to listen, or I can yield the floor way too much and feel like I'm, out of my depth or out of my league, or I don't have anything to offer this person, or whatever it is. So if there's that lack, if there's a dissonance instead of resonance, I imagine you're much more conscious of the imbalance in the conversation. And that probably creates this, self-fulfilling prophecy of, you're aware that, oh, I'm not talking enough, I'm not talking enough, or I'm talking too much, I'm talking too much. And you keep doing it, whichever one it is. But I think when we're with someone with whom we have that connection and that resonance, it becomes a conversation, which to me is what sales is about. It's not about pitching something or trying to convince someone. It's simply a conversation. And if I have resonance with that person, that conversation is going to be easy. Doesn't necessarily mean that the sale will close, but at least there will be value exchanged in some way, whether that's a referral or just, even just knowing, hey, we get along great, but this might not be a good fit right now. So, but at least it feels good to have those kinds of conversations.
In my mind, I always kind of felt like that. I would try to give the prospect the illusion that it's a conversation.
Mhm. Right. And in your mind, you have a little map, right? Like,
Yes.
kind of touch points that you want to hit as you're having it. But yeah, I think the more you're connecting with that ideal person, the more it's naturally going to feel that way.
It's kind of like
And
Socrates has this set of questions, right?
Mhm.
And he has this path that he wants to go to, but he's asking questions depending upon what the responses are.
Right.
He guides it towards that, but he got it in his mind, and I have it in my mind, this path that I want to get to, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
we're qualifying. These are qualifying questions to dig
Yeah.
down to
Yeah.
see if like whatever thing I'm promoting, that I'm trying to sell, is it a fit or isn't it?
Right, right. And when we have that idea that it's about a conversation and it's about building relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And not every relationship is a marriage. Some of them are just, a date or holding hands or saying, "Hey, that person's cute over there." And, being able to point them in a different direction that might be a better fit. And so by releasing attachment that, every conversation is going to result in marriage, um, it allows us to just, to be more open and relaxed with it.
So, what are some things introverts can do to be better in selling? What do you have a list? Do you have some thoughts
Well,
on this?
yeah, I have some superpowers that we have that I
Oh,
think, help us that, part of it is number one, releasing the story about sales being icky. Um, what has helped me, and this was the first coach I had when I started the Introvert Entrepreneur, he would always frame sales as an education process. You're not selling per se, but you are educating people. You are not only sharing information about what you have to offer in your services, but you are sharing information that's going to make their lives better, whether or not they work with you. And so it's the whole package of content, right? And all the messaging you're putting out and the way you're connecting with them. And even your presence, like if you're modeling what it is that you are selling. Um, so so first is to let go of that idea that sales is something that's gross and icky and nobody likes to do it. Think about, how do you like to be sold to? It's probably, especially for introverts, through a series of like, give me some information about this. Let me think about this. Let me process it. Give me lots of details. So seeing it as educating. And so these superpowers that we have, once you're able to kind of cross that bridge and say, okay, sales is not icky. Sales is actually a conversation. It's relationship building. It's education. Then we can look at our strengths that we often have naturally and use those and leverage those in the sales process, such as connecting one-on-one. I've had a lot of introvert entrepreneurs who will say to me, I'm not very good in groups. I do best one-on-one.
Right, right,
And
right.
and they're almost apologizing for that. And I'm like, no, that's great. Because the sales happen, person to person, one-on-one. Ultimately you're looking for that kind of human connection. So connecting one-on-one is actually one of your superpowers. Another one, and I've alluded to this, is our ability to listen, and have curiosity with that listening. Introverts, contrary to my babbling, usually like to listen more than they like to talk. The one time you can get us to babble is if we feel safe. If we, feel like we trust the other person, we have some control of the situation. And so we can be as talkative as the rest of them. But in a sales situation, we have that ability to be able to sit back and really listen, and to ask questions. It's not about, here's what I have to offer. Does this fit you? It's saying, what do you need? Right? So listening and curiosity, ability to create safety. Often introverts, because they are listeners, because they connect one-on-one, they're often the type of person that someone will say, gosh, I just met you 5 minutes ago and I feel like I could tell you anything. Or I just told you my whole life story. And I hear that from introverts a lot, that that's something they've heard most of their lives. And that's really about safety. That's about somebody feeling like they can be real with you. And it's only by somebody being real that they can open up and tell you what they really need. What is their pain point? What are they afraid of? What do they most want? And an introvert, if you don't have it naturally, and this is for extroverts too, cultivate that ability to create safety so that they have that ability to be vulnerable. Because when they have that ability to be vulnerable, then you can provide information and hopefully provide help. And then lastly is, and this isn't the only, these aren't the only superpowers, but they're the ones that I'm
I'm liking
in
these,
on.
by the way.
Yeah. Oh, good. The last one is a preference for preparation. Sometimes that can cross over into over preparation, overthinking. Like, I can't pick up the phone until I have an entire script and I need to know everything that I'm going to say. That can go a little bit too far, but we do tend to do our homework, do our research, and say, okay, so what is it that this person, what can I already learn about this person, whether it's a specific person or your avatar, that will help me speak to, ask better questions and speak to their needs and wants more specifically. It also, preparation also just helps us calm down. It helps us to be more present because I'm not worried about, whether I know enough. And one thing I want to say about the preparation real quick, and I picked this up from someone I interviewed for my podcast named John Doerr. And he talks about we have to be aware and prepared enough in our own minds to what is our unique value proposition, because that's something we've heard for decades, right? That's just common wisdom. But what has shifted probably in the last 10 to 20 years is the internet. anybody can go on and do tons of research. And by the time they get to you as the person selling them something, they have a lot of information. And so you have to be able to add something extra to that that tells them not just like, I'll use coaching, for instance, not just what's the value of hiring a coach and what can you expect and what's the difference between coaching and therapy and, all of those kinds of typical questions. By the time they probably are talking to you, they know all of those things. And so you, as the coach, you have to be able to say, here's what's unique about working with me, or here's what I can offer you that nobody else can. Here's the piece of the story that is mine that resonates with yours. And so an introvert often, has that level of introspection and can go deep and be prepared for being able to go beyond the surface of the information.
Yep. Sometimes what I see where some people get stuck is analysis paralysis.
Absolutely.
I've got clients who are like, well, I want to make sure I think of everything that the person I'm talking to on the phone might object to. I want to have a ready answer to that. And I'm just like, just pick the bloody phone up.
Right. My thing is know how you're going to start, know how you want to close, and be open to the rest. Yes, and trust yourself, because if you've been doing this and not
trust yourself. That's exactly it. Yeah. Have more faith in yourself.
Yeah. And trust that, you can be honest. And if, I am perhaps transparent and vulnerable to a fault, but if somebody were to object to something and I honestly didn't know, I might just say, wow, that's a really good question. I'm not sure, because we're human beings and I don't want to come across as some scripted machine, ready to play defense. I mean, that's sort of what is happening, right? If you're coming with, 20 answers to every possible objection, it's like you're automatically in defensive mode. I just say, know how you're going to open, know how you're going to close, and trust the middle.
Yep. Beth, how can people find you online?
They can find me at theintrovertentrepreneur.com, and there you'll find the podcast by the same name, as well as, iTunes and all that. My sporadic blog, as well as information about the book and my coaching services.
And you've got if I remember right, there's a freebie. There's an ebook, right? That you.
Yeah, if you sign up for my newsletter, which is also a little bit sporadic, I will tell you, but so is Dan Pink's, so I feel like I'm in good company. But the bonus is that when you sign up, you get an automatic download of I is for Introvert, which is a crowdsourced, alphabetized list of all the awesome things about being an introvert, along with some bonus essays. That so far everyone who's gotten it has given me positive feedback. So I hope that you'll sign up and enjoy that gift.
So if you give our listeners one piece of advice, both the introverts and the extroverts, and I guess those few ambiverts out there, if you would give us one piece of advice we could go and take action on this week, what would that be, Beth?
I would go to my website. I would cover up the header and the footer, read the copy, and say, could this be on anyone's website, or is this unique to me? And if you read it and you feel like, okay, this could be interchanged with any other, fill in the blank professional, what can you do to make it more authentic and differentiate it for you? Because while I'm talking about a website, that is the portal often to people finding you, to where you can even have that sales conversation. And if you're not differentiating yourself right there, then, people are going to say, well, I don't quite get it. My favorite expression is a confused mind always says no. And so if they're confused in any way, if they're not sure what you can offer them or how you're different, then they're going to move on. So I challenge you to look at your website, cover up header, footer. Is this you, or could it be anyone? And then take steps to remedy whatever you see.
Great advice. And in fact, the same thing is true of your LinkedIn profile.
Absolutely.
Beth, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you for coming to Sales Babble and babbling a bit. Hope it hasn't been too exhausting.
Nope, I'm good. I've got half an hour and then a client, so I've got enough time to take a power nap, and then I'm all set to go.
Sweet.
Yes. Thanks, Pat.
As Beth said, there's these superpowers that introverts have, their ability to educate people, their ability to leverage the strength of connecting one-on-one, their ability to listen, their ability to create a safe space so that people can really open up and share, their preference for preparation. As I mentioned earlier, we had Alan Meyer on probably a couple of years ago, and he said the same thing. That introverts can actually become extremely powerful in sales. So if you have any of those tendencies, don't think that it's necessarily some deficit that you have. It can actually be your superpower. To connect with Beth and to get her free ebook, you can find her in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. If you're not yet subscribed to our email list, please do. You can go right to the website at salesbabble.com, and you can make sure that you get updated on every time the podcast comes out, and a direct link to the show notes. And again, the show notes are what really differentiates Sales Babble from other podcasts. They provide you an easy way of finding exactly what we talked about so that you can take action and boost your sales today. If you got a question, you got a comment, don't hesitate to reach out. Click the Babble Me button on the salesbabble.com website and give me a comment. Give me a question. I'd love to connect. That's all I got for this week. So until next week, take care and have a highly successful and profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.